In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 1st, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Alabama versus Florida. Florida's home court is going to feel less like a college arena and more like a pressure cooker in this matchup. You can almost hear that band already because this is a ranked team sitting at 15-6 overall and 6-2 in conference play, taking the floor where they have been about as comfortable as a team can be in front of its own crowd. They have stacked win after win in Gainesville, and that kind of home form does not just show up in the standings, it usually shows up against the number 2. The style fits the building as well, with Florida playing fast enough to keep the tempo lively, but still organized enough to run sound half-court sets and string together real defensive stops when the game tightens. Across the court, Alabama arrives as the wild, high-horsepower offense that wants to turn every possession into a sprint, almost like a team that is happier in a pickup game than a half-court clinic. Their scoring profile is built around pace, threes, and pressure at the rim, and that can be terrifying for any opponent that is not ready to run all afternoon. The catch is that when you live at that speed, you live with some chaos, and their defense has shown that, giving up big numbers often enough that it is part of their identity now, not just a bad week. Florida leans into a different kind of edge, throwing real size and physicality at the glass, grabbing second-chance opportunities, and turning those dirty work plays into easy points that break the will of teams that prefer things clean and pretty. Injuries tilt the balance of comfort a bit too. Alabama is pulling pieces in and out, with a key rim protector back in the mix but still playing with the uncertainty of a game-time decision in the front court and a couple of long-term absences lingering in the rotation. That constant reshuffling can make a team feel like it is always adjusting on the fly, especially in a loud environment. Florida, by contrast, comes in with a stable starting group, no fresh names on the injury sheet, and the confidence of having just gone on the road, lit up the scoreboard, and locked an opponent down on the other end in the same week. There is also a mental piece that is hard to quantify but easy to feel. Florida has strung together multiple wins in a row in this series, and they have not just squeaked by, they have piled up points and stretched margins, which sticks in the back of both teams' minds. For the Gators, it reinforces the idea that their style really bothers this opponent. For the Tide, it adds a little extra pressure if they fall behind early because the recent history has not exactly painted this matchup as a friendly one. Honestly, when you stack the home edge, the rebounding muscle, the steadier injury situation, and the psychological boost from recent meetings, it nudges this game toward one side once that spread is on the table. As our first pick for this matchup, the Florida Gators men's basketball to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. This matchup has the feel of one where the scoreboard crew might get more of a workout than the broadcast team. Both offenses bring real firepower, and neither coach is exactly famous for wanting to slow things down and grind through long, empty trips. Alabama leans all the way into pace, hunting early threes and quick rim attacks, which naturally inflates possessions and creates more scoring swings on both ends. When a team plays that fast, even a 2-minute stretch can flip from quiet to absolute chaos, and that is before you add in a whistle or two that sends them to the line. Florida is not out there trying to win a rock fight either. They put up big point totals of their own, and lately their confidence on offense has looked higher, with cleaner spacing and shots falling from outside that were a bit more inconsistent earlier in the year. They love to push off defensive rebounds, and when a home team starts running after misses in front of its crowd, the energy can build in a hurry, like a snowball rolling downhill that you suddenly realize is not stopping. That kind of back-and-forth rhythm often pulls the opponent into the same style, even if the original plan was to slow things down. The history between these two only adds fuel to that picture. Recent meetings have turned into track meets, with Florida pouring in huge totals, and both teams combining for scores that look more like an all-star game than a routine league contest. The pattern has been remarkably consistent, with game after game sailing past typical numbers for a college matchup, which is why people keep circling this pairing whenever they want a high-scoring watch. It is one thing when a result feels random, it is another when both sides keep repeating the same script year after year. Zooming out to the bigger sample, Alabama's road games tend to fall into the same high-tempo, high-scoring pattern. Their style does not really change away from home. They still push the ball, still take early threes, and still give opponents room to post strong numbers of their own. Florida's offense, on the other hand, often spikes in these big home spots, especially against teams that do not mind running with them. Here is the thing, when you mix a fast road team that shoots in bunches with a confident home team that rebounds, runs, and has already put up big numbers in recent form, you get a matchup that points more toward a game of trading haymakers than a slow, methodical grind. So while the projected total sits in territory that might scare off a casual bettor, the way these two play, and the way they have played against each other, steers this matchup toward one specific side of that number. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Purdue versus Maryland. A Sunday matchup in College Park brings that classic Big Ten contrast, a steady contender rolling in against a home team still trying to figure out what it wants to be. The visitors carry a strong record, something in that midwinter sweet spot where most of the country already treats them as a serious factor, and they have the numbers to back it up. They put up more than 80 points a night, win by close to double digits, and sit near the top of the national charts in helpers, which tells you the ball does not stick and that a lot of their shots are coming off clean looks. It feels less like a collection of solo acts and more like a touring band that has played the same set for months, tight, rehearsed, and a little ruthless when they see a mismatch. On the other side, the home group lives in a very different neighborhood in the standings, with a losing record both overall and in conference play, which is a rough way to go through a Big Ten winter. They give up close to 80 a game, the scoring margin tilts against them, and the assist numbers sag, so you see long stretches where possessions turn into one-on-one experiments and the rhythm just dies. That kind of profile can hang around for a half at home when the building is loud, but over 40 minutes it often buckles when a polished offense keeps making the next right pass. Layer on a first-year head coach trying to blend transfers and freshmen, a rotation already thinner on the wing because of a season-ending Achilles injury to Rockies Passmore, and a key guard like Guillermo Del Pino hovering on the injury report, and the margin for error shrinks even more. The visiting side, coached by a long-tenured boss who loves structure, inside-out offense, and detail, comes in with both a chip and a checklist. And they have already had stretches near the top of the polls, then hit a bump with a 3-game skid against quality opponents, and that sort of spell usually leads to some uncomfortable film sessions about rebounding, toughness, and doing the boring things again. When a veteran team with real aspirations walks into a struggling building after that kind of talk, it usually is not showing up to trade punches for fun, it is showing up to make a point. The host defense has already shown a habit of leaking clean looks and late closeouts against far less refined attacks, and that is exactly the kind of environment this visiting offense tends to pull apart bit by bit until the scoreline starts to stretch. As our first pick for this matchup, the Purdue Boilermakers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring-wise, this matchup leans toward the kind of game where you look up midway through the second half and realize both teams have been pulled into a higher tempo than they might admit. The higher-powered offense averages around 83 points per night and allows close to 70, so their typical outing already lands in a pretty lively scoring range. The other side scores in the low 70s, gives up close to 80, and their average night also ends up in that same neighborhood, just reached by a messier path with a lot more defensive headaches. Even without getting lost in spreadsheets, that pattern alone points toward a matchup where possessions add up and the scoreboard keeps moving. Stylistically, the strong offense uses spacing and passing rather than sheer speed, but that can be even more punishing. Cutters, inside touches, and kick-out threes stack up over time, and every clean look forces the opponent to sprint back mentally and physically. The home team has a newer guard group that likes to let it fly from deep, with a healthy volume of threes going up and, on good nights, a respectable number dropping. The funny thing is that even on cold nights, those shots keep coming, which is great for drama and often terrible for anyone hoping for a slow, grind-heavy total. Here is the thing, if the more polished offense finds its footing early and builds a cushion, the team chasing the game almost never chooses patience, it presses the gas. Transition chances get pushed, early clock threes become normal, and offensive sets shrink from full meals into quick snacks. With a backcourt rotation already stressed by Passmore's absence for the season and Del Pino's health question, fatigue becomes part of the story, and tired legs show up most brutally on defense and closeouts. Late in games, that cocktail of tired defenders, forced shots, and fouling to extend possessions tends to add extra points in bunches, especially from the free throw line, which quietly inflates totals in the last 90 seconds. When both teams already live most nights in a scoring range that leans high, and the matchup script tilts toward pace picking up rather than slowing down, a higher scoring outcome fits the way this one is likely to feel. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Iowa State versus Kansas State. This matchup in Manhattan feels like one of those Big 12 afternoons where the energy in the building is trying very hard to erase the gap between the two teams. The trouble for the home side is that the gap between how these two groups are playing right now is not a small crack, it is a canyon. Iowa State walks in at 19-2 with one of the biggest scoring margins in the country, winning by a little over 20 points per game on average, which is ridiculous for a power conference team. They are not sneaking past people in 1 or 2 possession rock fights. They are walking out of gyms with comfortable wins, the kind of results that make you much less nervous about laying chalk because big numbers are already normal for them. Their whole personality on the road is built on pressure. They pick up the ball early, they swarm passing lanes, and they turn lazy dribbles into layups, which is exactly the sort of style that lets a favorite create separation without having to live off half-court jumpers all night. Kansas State, by contrast, is sitting at 10-11 with a profile that looks fun on offense and very shaky on defense, scoring in the low 80s but giving up almost 80 themselves. That is a great recipe for entertaining basketball and a terrible recipe when you are trying to slow down a visiting team that already punishes every crack it finds. Their defense has only managed to keep a tiny handful of opponents under 70 all season, and that was mostly in the softer part of the schedule, while league play has turned into a steady stream of opponents feeling way too comfortable. Normally, you would say that Bramlett Coliseum with its Octagon of Doom reputation is the great equalizer, the kind of place where the crowd can spook even the best ball handlers. Honestly, this version of Kansas State has not backed that mythology up. When your defense is giving up clean looks and second chances, even the loudest building turns into background noise because fans cannot stay at full volume through every possession if the visitors keep walking to the rim or stepping into rhythm threes. Iowa State has already gone into hostile Big 12 environments, taken a punch, and learned from the one that finally stung, that loss at Kansas that snapped their unbeaten run, then responded with a string of double-digit wins that looked like a team deciding to leave no doubt again. Since that night, they have blown out quality opponents, including that 30-point beating of UCIF, another double-digit win at Oklahoma State, and the 30-point rout of Colorado, which is exactly what you want to see from a supposed heavyweight. In a crowded Big 12 conference race, they are behaving like a team that understands style points still matter, and that mindset often shows up in how they handle the last 5 minutes of games, when some teams relax and others press the advantage. On the other side, Kansas State's best path is to lean into chaos, run, hope the crowd juices them, and trust that their shot-making at home can offset the defensive issues. But that is exactly the kind of game Iowa State has been thriving in because they are more efficient, more disciplined, and much more secure with the ball. Turnovers that might be harmless against an average opponent become a problem here because the Cyclones not only force them at a high rate, they convert them into points with ruthless consistency. When you combine a favorite that wins by margin as a matter of habit with an opponent whose comfort zone is a kind of free-flowing chaos that actually feeds the Cyclone's strengths, the roadmap where this one stays tight for 40 minutes looks a lot narrower than the roadmap where the visitors build a lead, absorb a couple of runs, and still end up comfortably in control. As our first pick for this matchup, the Iowa State Cyclones to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total on this game sits high, and honestly it deserves to, because you have one team that lives in the mid-80s most nights, and another that is perfectly happy to trade possessions and shots in the low 80s. This is not one of those old-school Big 12 bruisers where both coaches secretly want the first team to 60 to win. This is much closer to a modern race where both offenses are comfortable scoring in bunches. Iowa State is near the top of the nation in scoring margin and among the better offenses in major college basketball, and they are getting there with real efficiency, sitting over 50% from the field and near the top of the national three-point charts, which means their average night already looks like a good night for most teams. They do not need a freak shooting performance to reach a big number. Their normal game, with their spacing and ball movement, already pushes scores up. Kansas State's identity this season leans into pace and freedom. They attack early in the clock. They let their scorers hunt shots, and that style inflates both their own numbers and their opponent's numbers because there are simply more trips up and down the floor. It is a bit like watching a pickup game where nobody is too worried about milking the shot clock. Good or bad, the next possession is only a few seconds away. That is great news if you are thinking about the scoreboard rather than the final margin. Defensively, Kansas State has allowed almost as many points as it scores, hovering just under 80 conceded per game, which is a polite way of saying that if you can run your stuff at all, you are probably getting to your own average against them. Now drop one of the country's most efficient and explosive offenses into that setup, one that already enjoys turning steals into layups and missed shots into quick threes the other way. And it starts to look like a track meet waiting to happen. The interesting wrinkle is that Iowa State's defense is legitimately elite, sitting around the mid-60s in opponent points per game, which might scare people off a high total at first glance. Here is the thing, that number exists alongside an offense in the mid-80s, so their games still tend to live in a combined total that is very healthy because their own scoring pressure forces opponents to chase, take quicker shots, and stretch possessions. Even when the Cyclones clamp down, they rarely turn games into true rock fights. They just win those games by 20 instead of 10. Kansas State might absolutely run into scoring droughts against this defense. A few empty trips in a row are almost baked in, but over 40 minutes a team that averages over 80 and plays fast at home usually finds a way to stack points in little flurries. Role players shoot a bit more confidently, whistle-friendly drives turn into free throws, and you get those mini runs where an 8-point gap becomes a 14-point gap without much resistance, which again helps the overall total rather than hurting it. Endgame chaos is another quiet ally for a high number here. If the score gets into that familiar territory where one side is comfortably ahead but the trailing team keeps pushing to make the final margin respectable, you start to see the classic sequence: quick threes, quick responses, intentional fouls, and free throws with the clock stopped. Those last 2 or 3 minutes can easily stack 10 or more points on top of whatever pace the game had already set, and in a matchup of two high-scoring teams, that can be the difference between an entertaining high-scoring game and a total that actually cashes. With both offenses living near the top of the conference charts, one defense that is elite but plays at a pace that does not suffocate possessions, and another defense that has not shown much resistance, the most natural script here points toward both teams landing in comfortable scoring ranges rather than being dragged into a slow, choppy slugfest. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Wichita State versus Tulsa. Wichita State Shockers and Tulsa Golden Hurricane meet on Sunday, February 1st, 2026, and both teams walk in feeling pretty good about themselves after stacking wins. Recent form actually lines up in a fun way, with each side on a 5-game surge, so it is not one of those spots where one team is limping and the other is cruising. Wichita State comes in around a 13-8 type season mark with a 5-3 feel in league play. Built on a pretty workmanlike mix of defense, rebounding, and just enough offense when it really matters. Tulsa answers with something louder, sitting near 18-3 with something like a 6-2 record in the conference, and firmly planted near the top of the American standings while enjoying the comfort of the Donald W. Reynolds Center crowd. Last season tells a very different story for Tulsa because that group slogged through something like a 13-20 campaign that left them buried near the bottom of the league. This year feels almost like a rebrand, with Tulsa not just winning but winning in style, stacking results like 100-57, 98-74, 99-77, and 97-48. Those are not just wins, they are statements that say, if you cannot keep up, we are going to run right past you. The on-court identity fits that vibe, with Tulsa pushing tempo, shooting confidently, and leaning into an attack that tends to snowball once they get a couple of good possessions in a row. Wichita State, by contrast, leans into a more balanced and blue-collar approach where they are comfortable grinding, guarding, and making the game physical when needed. That style can travel, which is important, but there is a catch. The Shockers are dealing with a thinner rotation, highlighted by a season-ending injury to forward Jarrett Valencia and a handful of guards who have already been ruled out for the year or are lingering on the injury list. When a team that wants to lean on toughness loses bodies, especially on the perimeter and in the front court, it can show up late in games through fatigue, foul trouble, or simply fewer reliable options when the matchups get tricky. Tulsa does not have that same cloud hanging over them right now, with no long-term absences locked in and only short-term question marks around a couple of guards in recent weeks. That relative health lets them keep their pace, roll more bodies through the rotation, and hold on to the aggressive personality that has been working so well at home. Add to that the recent history between these programs, where Tulsa swept Wichita State last season and even finally grabbed a win in Wichita for the first time since 2001, and you get a mental edge that lines up nicely with the on-court momentum. In a game where both teams are playing well, the home side that is used to winning by comfortable margins, that is healthier, and that already broke through this matchup barrier recently is naturally in a stronger position to stretch any late one-possession battle into a clearer separation on the scoreboard. As our first pick for this matchup, the Tulsa Golden Hurricane to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Tulsa's games this season have started to feel like track meets where the shot clock is more of a suggestion than a rule. They repeatedly find themselves pushing into the 80s and 90s, and when they really get going, those 100-point outbursts are not shocking anymore. They are part of the pattern. The combination of pace, confidence, and willingness to shoot early in the clock creates a style that naturally inflates scoring, because even a sloppy possession can still turn into points when there are that many possessions to work with. Wichita State might not live in that same hyper-fast world every night, but there is plenty of evidence they can be dragged into it. That wild 104-100 double overtime win over Charlotte showed they can handle extended, high-scoring stretches once the game opens up. Conference play has brought more examples, like the 85-67 performance against Florida Atlantic and the 86-85 result against South Florida, where both sides were allowed to breathe a little on offense. Even in some of the less pleasant outings, the Shockers have still seen totals climb into the mid-range, with scores like 77-60 and 74-59 hinting that they are not stuck in rock fights every night. Here is the thing, the injury situation for Wichita State that trims their depth does not just affect who wins, it affects how the game flows from a scoring standpoint. A shorter bench often means tired legs in the second half, and tired legs usually mean slower closeouts on shooters, late rotations at the rim, and more fouls when players are a half step behind. More fouls mean more trips to the free throw line, and free throws are the quiet engine behind a lot of big totals, especially late in games when both teams are pressing and the whistle tightens up. Both teams step into this matchup on 5-game winning streaks, and that kind of confidence usually encourages coaches to lean into what has been working instead of slamming on the brakes. Tulsa will want to run, play to the crowd, and let their offense cook, and Wichita State will know they have already shown they can keep up when the scoreboard starts spinning. It sets up a rhythm where long stretches of the game feel more like a race to keep pace than a careful chess match, with each side answering the other and refusing to completely go away. In that sort of environment, sustained tempo, a high volume of possessions, and the likelihood of late-game fouls all point in the same direction, toward a matchup that leans more toward fireworks than a low-scoring grind. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Illinois versus Nebraska. Illinois heads into Lincoln on Sunday, February 1st, 2026, walking into a Big Ten showdown that feels more like a late-season statement game than a regular date on the schedule. Nebraska sits at 9-1-0 in league play and 20-1-0 overall, with the only blemish a tight road loss at Michigan earlier in the week, while Illinois is right there at 18-3-0 and just as hungry. Both teams sit in that national top tier, yet the number hanging out there makes Nebraska only a modest home favorite, which basically tells you oddsmakers respect both sides and are nudging you to choose who blinks first. Nebraska has built a profile that looks tailor-made for this kind of spot. The Huskers have been incredibly steady, rarely throwing in a dud, and the advanced numbers back that up. With their overall efficiency sitting in that top group nationally, their attack rating very well, and their defense grading out at a level that travels. They are not racing up and down. Their games play at a reasonably controlled tempo, a little slower than the national average, and in a tight spread game, that kind of pace helps the home team lean into all the little edges that do not show up on a box score. Comfort with the rims, the way the ball bounces off the back iron, the quick roar of a crowd that has seen this team climb into the national conversation, all of it tends to stretch out small edges, especially when the building gets loud on every key stop. There is also the memory of what happened the last time these two met. Nebraska already walked into Champaign and came out with a win, grabbing that game on a last-second 83-80 thriller that reminded everyone that they are not intimidated by the name on the other jersey. Since then, they have stacked strong home results, taking out good teams like Creighton, Wisconsin, and Oregon by comfortable margins in this same arena, using their defense as the steady base and letting the offense ride the home energy when it catches fire. Illinois brings in an offense that can make any underdog look foolish if it gets rolling. Their scoring machine has been one of the most efficient in the country, and they have spent a lot of nights living in the 80s on the scoreboard, winning by double digits and making it look routine. The twist is that this attack is now running with a little less depth, with a starting guard sidelined by a broken hand and a reserve center out long-term because of a blood clot issue, which subtly tightens the rotation and trims some flexibility, especially in a physical road game. That does not suddenly make Illinois harmless, far from it, but it does change how long they can keep certain lineups on the floor and how they manage foul trouble or fatigue in a loud building. Nebraska is not completely spotless either, with a key big man and a forward dealing with health questions and a couple of longer-term issues lurking in the background. But what matters for this handicap is that their overall body of work, the one that produced those 20 wins to 1 loss and a top 5 national ranking, already bakes in how they have adjusted. They have lived with those realities, adapted their rotation, and still kept winning, especially at home, where the combination of crowd, style, and confidence has turned close games into wins by a few possessions more often than not. So what you are left with is a slightly deeper, more balanced group at home, undefeated in their own building, responding to their first loss of the season with a chance to punch back in front of a fan base that has been waiting a long time to feel this kind of relevance. And that is exactly the sort of environment where a small home favorite often finds a way not just to win, but to stretch the margin enough for bettors to be happy. As our first pick for this matchup, the Nebraska Cornhuskers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Taking a step toward the total, the first instinct for a lot of people will be to lean toward a higher scoring game, especially with how Illinois has been lighting up scoreboards. Their offense has looked like a cheat code at times, sitting at the very top of the efficiency charts and averaging in the mid-80s on many nights by spreading the floor, driving gaps, and piling up free throw attempts. Watching them, you can almost feel possession snowball, one clean look into another, and it becomes easy to assume that any game they touch will turn into a track meet. Nebraska, though, can also play their part in a high-scoring script. They have an offense that rates well in the advanced numbers. They have had home games where the threes start falling and the building turns into a party, and they already played in that 83-80 finish in Champaign, a game that landed in the 160 range on the total points. So on the surface, it sounds wild to suggest that this matchup could actually lean the other way compared with that first meeting. Here is the thing. The second time two strong teams see each other, the game often feels very different. Both coaching staffs have a full game of film against this exact opponent. They know which actions hurt them, which matchups they did not like, and they usually trim some of the easy stuff that led to clean looks the first time. Now fold in the fact that Illinois is traveling, carrying that same explosive offense but with a shorter rotation because of the injuries to a starting guard and a reserve big, and it nudges them towards slightly more methodical possessions and a bit more half-court creation, simply because there is less margin for wild pace if legs get tired. Nebraska's natural rhythm already tilts toward control rather than chaos. Their tempo sits in the slower half of the national rankings. They are comfortable grinding in the half court, and their defense has the kind of efficiency profile that suggests they can dictate terms, especially in their own building. They have shown in this arena that they can choke off quality opponents, holding dangerous offenses to very modest totals, and that is not an accident. It is a reflection of how they prioritize getting set, protecting the paint, and contesting threes. So while that first showdown turned into a fireworks show, this one has a good chance to feel more like a chess match than a sprint. Possessions can stretch, transition chances can dry up if both teams commit numbers back on defense, and every empty trip becomes a little more important, which often leads to longer, more deliberate sets and a few more late clock situations. There is always the risk that both teams catch fire from three and turn the game into a shooting contest again, and honestly, that is the scenario you have to live with if you are chasing a lower scoring angle in a matchup between two capable offenses. But if this plays out as a game where the legs get heavy, the rotations stay a bit tighter, whistles do not turn the final minutes into a parade to the free throw line, and the home team's preference for structure wins the tug of war over pace, then the final combined score can land shy of what most people expect when they think back to that first meeting. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.